Here, we're looking at competitive colleges. I wanted to see where she fit in as far as where her GPA is. And the one thing that bothered me was we only get their weighted GPA. We don't get their unweighted GPA. And I hate to tell you, these big colleges want their unweighted GPA and not their weighted GPAs. And we have no way to figure that out except for figuring it out ourselves, which means that we have to go back through 4 years of school and look at every marking period and figure it out ourselves. And there's a lot of things weighed in there because because they have a lab, this is worth this much, or it's a half a year, it's only worth this much. It's a lot to figure out as a parent. And there's no directions on how to do it. You just use your common sense and your, and when I called and asked the guidance department about it, the answer that I got was bothersome. Who told you that? And I go, I've talked to a few colleges and big colleges, and I know people that are looking at big colleges that want their unweighted GPA.
MIT.
And right, you're one of them too.
MIT.
And the guidance department cannot help them when asked. I have a friend who spent 4 hours trying to figure out her son's unweighted GPA to get into a honors program at Temple, and had to sit there for 4 hours and figure it out. He had to go through every single report card and figure it out. So that was a little bothersome that we're not giving those things to the parents, because that is something that these kids, especially that are looking at colleges, really need. And the reason being is, and I'll give you an example. Again, I work at different schools. B. Reed Henderson, do you know what they get for an A in an AP class? A 5.5. What do we get? A 4.8. So how can you compare? That's why colleges don't look at weighted GPAs, because every school has a different scoring. There's no standard in the state, in our state, or in anywhere, there's no standard for an AP honors or an academic class. So that was frustrating for me, because I don't know what my daughter's unweighted GPA is. So throwing that out there too, that could be something that we could put into the system too, where we can see both unweighted and weighted. Okay?
Any other public comment? If not, we'll start with the agenda items. The first item is the reading program improvement proposal, Words Their Way. Mr. Sadowski.
Good evening, Matt Sadowski, K-5 supervisor. I am very excited today to bring you a program that's going to sort of finish our balanced literacy plan for our elementary school students. My predecessor, Stephanie Washington, stood up here before all of you and talked about it being the Writer program, which is now implemented in all of our elementary schools, and Making Meaning, which will be is being piloted currently and will be fully implemented in 2 of our elementary schools, and then hopefully the year after in all 7 elementary schools. So there's a really critical piece that's currently missing, which is our phonics, our word work instruction. So there's really 2 basic theories of how you could implement word study into a classroom. So there's the whole language approach, which really it's taught almost fully in context through stories and writing. And then there's the phonics-based instruction, which is very isolated, where it's just taught those individual phonics skills. So one thing that I particularly like about Words Their Way is that it sort of is balanced and takes both approaches and sort of meshes them together to be what's best for our students, our youngest students learning their how to spell. So I have a unique perspective, the fact that I was one of the 21 pilot teachers in our district that is piloting this. We have teachers in 1st through 5th grade that are piloting it amongst 5 of our elementary schools currently. So I can speak very clearly about what I noticed between my students. So before we even get into sort of how this program works, I can say that with Reading Street, the kids would go home and they would practice their 10 spelling words. They would come back a week later, they would write their 10 spelling words correctly as a dictation. 5 minutes later, they'd be writing a story, they'd be writing in any class, and it would be spelled completely wrong. That exact same word 5 minutes ago, they spelled correctly on a test. So the philosophy of Words Their Way is a little bit different. We're not asking kids to memorize. In fact, that's something that the program says is completely against their philosophies. We're not asking our kids to memorize. We're asking our kids to look at spelling patterns when we're talking about encoding and decoding, and really think about what are the rules that we're learning. So they go home and they practice that through a sort, which we're going to talk about in a minute. They come back, and their test, their assessment is not these 10 spelling words that were just part of their list. It's words that have that same skill, but we're assessing, are they able to apply the skill or apply that spelling rule to other words. So the way that this program is designed is through a series of sorts. Let me see if I can get this to go down. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so it's through a series of sorts. So one thing that we want to talk about, and Dr. Scheid mentioned this a little bit before in technology, that our brains really do need that multisensory approach. We can't just hear it, we can't just see it. We also have to be touching it, and we have to be moving it, and that's truly how kids learn. Not like how we learn, honestly, as adults. So this program is through a series of sorts. So the kids will get actual sorts that they can manipulate with their hands. Some examples of these sorts at our youngest age, we may be looking at word families. So you may be looking at the at and the at word family. So they may have the word cat, and they might have the word nap. And they have to decide, okay, well, cat, that's going to be part of the at family. That doesn't mean that on their test, we don't expect them to also know how to spell hat. In some of our older ages, this is one of my favorites, looking at able and ibble. Well, able are words that can stand alone, and we can add able to it, like breakable, break-able. But ibble is not. Possible is an example. Pos is not a word. So when you learn that, yes, that's great that now maybe you can spell and read breakable and possible, but there's so many other words. When you're thinking, wait, as an adult, there's times I have to stop and think, wait, is it able or ibble? Well, I know this rule, so now I can figure it out pretty easily. So that sort of shows you the gamut of your primary students to your upper elementary students. One of the things I like about this is if you look at any research, it really does tell you that just because a kid's in second grade doesn't mean that there needs to be a second grade list, that these are the words that they're working on. Reading Street, from my experience, has a very narrow approach. Your middle of the road kids, they're learning some words. It does nothing to extend for your high kids or really to remediate. So even though this program has 6 different levels, 6 different books. And yes, we can look and say, well, third grade, this is the typical book, but it's really not designed like that. Okay, so what happens is at the beginning of the year, the kids are given a spelling inventory. And once you score it, it comes with a little formula, and once you score it, it comes up with where this kid fits within these 6 books. So we'll talk a little about the cost later, but the kids will get that book, and that will become their sort. So within a classroom, you may have typically about 3 different groups going on in your classroom. So we're meeting their word study at their individual level, which is really important. That's how kids are going to learn and feel most successful, and also push them to succeed. I can tell you from my own experience that one of the great things about this is I'm seeing that connection. You know, they're spelling it right on their assessment, they're spelling it right 5 minutes later. But it's great as an educator because maybe I'm trained to sort of see some of those little nuances of kids picking things up, but parents at conferences were coming in and saying, wow, this is not something they've seen with their older children who have maybe gone through, I taught first grade, but have gone through the school. So the parents are also noticing that this is changing. And it's a different, it's a different philosophy for our parents because they were just like me. We learned 10 spelling words, went home, studied them, and came back. So they also are experiencing the new philosophy. So let me get back into the sorts. So they get these sorts, and throughout the week, they have different opportunities to sort, whether it's a writing sort, they do word hunts, so they're seeing that connection within books. So these are all things that the kids are asked to do during the week. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So right here, whoops, let me go back. So I'm going to go slowly through it, but you have it. These are the different, there's 6 different books, starting with emergent and early letter names. To go to the next part, I apologize. All the way down to syllables and affixes and derivational relations, which is where I got the ibble and able from. So I talked a little bit about evaluation. So we want to make sure that our kids are clearly progressing, and data is going to tell us that this program is working. And we are seeing that through our data. So weekly, teachers are able to give, or weekly or bi-weekly, a small assessment, like I said, that's not just based on these 10 words, it's based on these skills. So the teachers are able to see weekly or bi-weekly that kids are making progress, and what's great about the book is it says, okay, if the kids aren't doing well on this particular sort, go back and review sorts 4, 3, 4, 10, and 12, or whatever that may look like. 3 times a year, they're going to take that spelling inventory. So in January, we're going to ask our pilot teachers to again administer this spelling inventory. And we're going to be able to see that the kids are making progress. It's so many points. So if they scored 40 points in September, they're showing 60 points now, they're showing growth. So that's really important. And this will be something that will happen as we push this program out. To collect that data, but also to make sure for classroom teachers that we're making sound decisions for our students. So that's a little bit about the assessment piece. So I'm going to go into the costs and then answer any questions that you have. So before I even go to the next slide, I want to tell you that this is a 6-year program. What I'm presenting to you for today, we are not going to come back to you for any more costs in the next 6 years. So when you look at this cost, and we're going to talk about the breakdown, when you look at this cost, this is just for 6 years. So that's important to look at. So we have a proposal. Right now, we're looking at rolling this out to just 2 schools next year, which would be Sellersville and West Rock Hill, along with our 21 pilot teachers, because we don't want to give the materials and take it away and say, oh, hold off a year. We'll give it back to you in a year. We really thought about what was the best way to roll this out. Did we want to go 7 elementary schools? Did we want to go to the 5 elementary schools that are not going to be using Making Meaning next year? When we really thought about it, there was 2 critical pieces to our decision and our proposal to go with these 2 schools. One is the fact that we need to have this whole balanced approach to literacy and not do piecemeal. So next year, West Rock Hill and Sellersville will have complete implementation of Making Meaning, being a writer, and this would sort of close that gap. This would end the balanced literacy program. So we want to make sure that those teachers have all the necessary components to have a balanced literacy program. The concern about bringing it to one of the other 5 schools is that it's very piecemeal. They're still doing pieces of Reading Street. So an example would be, at least in 1st grade, the Reading Street tests, the way to assess our students, their comprehension piece, well, they have to know the Reading Street's phonics skill. So if we were to ask them to do this program, this is replacement instruction for Reading Street phonics. So then we're asking the teachers to create new assessments, or there's just no way to monitor those kids' comprehension skills because they don't know those phonics skills that are based in Reading Street. So this is going to be a way to get that whole approach. Again, 2 years or 2021 school year, we would be looking to bring this school district. So that's the plan. So when you look at this cost of about $91,000, that is the cost of student books. Again, this is renewable for 6 years, so we're not going to be saying 2 years from now, we need to keep adding this to our budget. That's not the case. This is for 6 years. They do have an online license. That's really good for that home piece if parents wanted that option. They wanted that option to do at home. But again, in the classroom, when we talked about that multi-sensory piece, the kids need to be touching those sorts. They need to be doing it. That's just how kids learn. Professional development, the reason that it says 0, they are going to implement, they're going to give us for free a 6-hour, 3 hours primary, 3 hours secondary, a free implementation of professional development. What's great about this program and doing it amongst the 5 schools with these 21 teachers is they can be great resources for us as turnkey trainers the following year. They're the ones who are entrenched in the program right now, so they can also provide additional professional development beyond what this 6-hour course would give for us to improve. So at this point, I'm open to any questions.
Can you back up a second when you talked about rolling this out piecemeal with keeping Reading Street? You lost me a little bit. So it seems to me that we are keeping it piecemeal by keeping Reading Street. Are you saying that you want to roll out Making Meaning and Words Their Way at the same time, and that's what you meant by it being piecemeal if we did one or the other as opposed to doing both at the same time? Is that what you meant?
Yes, and I apologize for that, yes.
Okay.
So in our 2 elementary schools, West Rock and Sellersville, next year, they are going to have Being a Writer, Making Meaning, full-blown, right? So we're going to add Words Their Way. If we didn't, you would be piecemealing it with Reading Street. The same thing would go with your other 5 schools. they don't have making, meaning, and being, and being a writer. They won't have making, meaning for another year. So we would be adding words their way, which is the phonics piece, and asking them still to do Reading Street with comprehension. They just don't mesh very well.
And Sellersville and West Rock Hill have all three, or next year they'll have all three?
They will have all three next year.
Because this is for them, is what you're saying?
Yes. Our
So
plan,
so they did a piecemeal this year, is what you're saying?
they're not doing words their way this year. So their phonics piece is through Reading Street.
So did they have to create all of those assessments to do that?
No, they can still do the Reading Street assessments because they're teaching the phonics piece through Reading Street.
Okay.
For sure.
Had we looked at, so you're saying that, how much of this, the 6-year license costs per year, the 15,000, so you're saying every 6 years, that's the cost that we would continue to pay every 6 years? Can you, did you look at the cost for purchasing across the board for all of our schools? Does it,
I have that.
is it proportionally the same, or is it less expensive to do that all at once?
It's not. And the concern is, if we were to go ahead and purchase this for the entire district next year, we would have 5 of our schools losing a year of that license because it would just be sitting there. And in 6 years, we're still gonna have to renew it.
Because they're not gonna be able to do it.
Because they're not doing it.
I understand what you're saying.
Right. So yes, it is proportional, and I have that cost if you wanted it.
If you.
Yep, I do, I have it right here. So it's about $200,000, $206,117.
Is that for all?
That would be if we were to go ahead and buy it for all 7 elementary schools, currently.
So, instead of the 92,000.
Correct. That's just if we were to go ahead and buy this next year for Sellersville and West Rock.
And 21.
Yeah.
And the 21 pilot teachers, yes, I apologize, yes.
Cheaper
Yes.
to do it for 7.
So the $200,000 number that you just quoted is for the other 5, or it would be for all 7?
All 7.
That does not seem proportional then.
Right.
It's not,
No,
it's
it's
not
not.
at all.
I mean, we're still factoring in the loss of a year, but if 2 schools are 92,000, then 7 schools can't be 200,000 in proportional.
No, it actually is,
Ah.
if you calculate it correctly.
If you're
because
taking
the
the year
21
off.
teachers are basically one more school.
That's correct, that's
Okay,
correct.
so it's the factoring out the 21
Effectively, we're
teachers.
Yes.
buying this for 3 schools,
Right,
although it's not specifically for 3 schools.
I understand that.
And so it looks like it's very close to being proportional.
Okay, that makes sense. It's the
Yes.
21 pilot
It is,
teachers,
and they
it's
would
not a
not-
school, but from a size standpoint, it is roughly.
Oh,
Okay.
Right, they would not be in the cost the following year, so I'm glad that you said that.
You had talked about, at some point in the future, when you talked about the fact that you can see the growth and how much better that growth is than our former program, would it, at some point when you have, could we have a presentation on that shows what the growth rate is compared to what it was with the old program?
So I can answer part of that. 100%, once we have more data, we can certainly come back and show you that growth. I don't have a comparison to what it was in Reading Street because we're literally just taking 10 spelling words and they're spelling them. There was no spelling inventory, if that makes sense. So I don't know that I can go back and say, well, this compares to what the data was before, but I can certainly show you what the data is showing now.
But you had reading and writing assessments, so you could compare what the growth was from the beginning of the year to the end of the year with the old program to the new program, right? Could we do something like
I
that?
could certainly look into that, absolutely.
Okay, and then I just wanted to share a couple of experiences with my 2nd grader,
Great.
in line with what you were talking about. As far as the sorts, I think what's one of the things that the students are doing is the teachers are it's not a scripted answer. The kids can sort them in different ways, and so the kids are being creative and finding their own ways to sort that are different from the examples that are given and learning that higher level of thinking. And then when I was reading with my 2nd grader and she's trying to sound out words that she doesn't know and she's using those rules, she knows rules that there are adults that don't know those rules, right? There are adults that never learned that, they memorized, as you're saying, and so they didn't learn how to apply those to new words. And I can give you an example. we're reading words, and then you come to a word that ends with an E, right? And then she can't pronounce the word, and I said, well, what does the E do to the vowel, right? And so I'm saying it's gonna make it the long vowel, and she says to me, oh, it makes it say its name, which is the way that they say the rule, right? So she already knew that rule, and then she applied it and she said the word. And so she's gotten so much better at it that now she does that herself, and I don't even need to ask the question, and she looks at it and she figures it out, and then she reads using those rules that she is remembering. So I can just see, you know, the difference between how quickly she's learning to figure out those other words when she's reading herself compared to even some teenagers who haven't picked up those rules that way, because you know we touched on the rules before, but not in this way, right? You know, you learned it with the 10 spelling words. You learned this is what these words do, and then you never talked about it again. And so I just, you know, when you see the kids learning to do that on their own, it's really neat to see.
I just have a couple, oh,
Yeah, sorry. I just wanna know, what's the, prep like with materials? A lot of photocopy, like initially a lot of photocopying and.
Shouldn't be a lot of photocopying because each kid has their own workbook. So if they do cutting again, it's not a waste of time. That is all part of their process, that multisensory piece.
Okay,
So the prep is minimal.
okay.
so I just really have a couple of comments. I like the spelling method because it's kind of like, I like with my children to answer their questions with a question, like, well, what do you think the answer is? How do you think that's spelled? So that to me, and I've had success with that, just, so I hope that will be successful for the kids as well, because it, like Megan was saying, it makes you think, and I think that embeds it in your brain, but I'm no education or whatever. And then I also like how the learning, I think if I understood what you said correctly, that it's tied to specific skills. You made some reference that said if they've gotten this incorrect, then you need to go back and address those. And from my previous experience, work experience, that's exactly how you move kids along very quickly to make them to gain reading levels is by going, or math levels, going back and going right to the skill instead of covering everything all over again. So those are two positive things that I see from it. So, thank you.
The cost per year, 6-year license of $15,000.
Yeah.
You did say that was what we would. The other costs you wouldn't repeat, right? So it's just the top cost. So because you get to 91, 92, how do you get from the 15 to the 92?
So I broke it down a couple different ways for you to look at. So the 91,000,
Oh, that's
almost
what
92,000 is your overall cost
For what?
Okay.
for the 6 years
15 times 6 is
How many do?
for 2 schools.
And
Plus, no, actually,
2 schools plus your 21 pilot teachers, so it is almost 3 schools.
so it's basically 30.
We should get the t-shirts.
Thank
It's
you
really
very
not
much.
bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
210,000.
yeah, 200, yeah.
I can't remember that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, keep it.
All right, we're good. Thank you, Mr. Sadowski.
Sure, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next item is the program improvement for journalism, the honors book approval, and I do have a copy of the book here that Dr. Shai brought in if anybody wants to see it up close. And that's what this is.
Well, once you learn how to spell and learn some words, they can take a journalism class in high school. Last fall, we approved a move for us to take our existing journalism course, which was a half-year elective, general elective, and change that to a full-year honors level journalism course that also allowed for seniors who are going to take the course to make this their English requirement. And as a result, we so much as I should say, this is where Yanko, our journalism teacher, did a lot of work to revise the curriculum and light up a to add a historical component and some other components, as well as adding in the idea that now, as opposed to the past, the journalism class would actually produce and publish the pendulum, which was done via a club before. The club still exists, so kids still can contribute, but essentially the job of producing a paper on a more regular basis now is a part of the journalism class. As you can imagine, it requires some more resources, and that is where this book comes in. The current textbook resource that we have for the class focuses on reporting in the media, and it's basically a how-to guide. So how to conduct interviews, how to deal with multimedia, whether it's television or podcasts and things, and other mediums like that. And it's pretty much a how-to. It's a good how-to. It presents a lot of information. It also comes with an AP style guide, and of course, as you can imagine, a lot of the stylistic and writing components are readily available online in various and sundry resources that are credible from universities and other journalistic organizations and publications. This particular book, The Elements of Journalism, by Kovacs and Rosenstiel, offers the, I don't say more philosophical, but ethical concerns. It offers the how and why of journalism. So why is journalism important? Why is it important to have rules? What are ethics in journalism? What purpose does journalism serve? This book has a lot of discussions like that, but also practical applications as well, things that people could, that journalists or people interested in journalism would want to consider. But it also has a component for people who are not journalists, people like me and you who want to know what the responsibilities and obligations are of journalists and of the journalism profession. So it covers a lot of ground. Additionally, because the course now goes to an honors course, and it would be someone's English course, we wanted to make sure that we raise the level of rigor. This book is also written, it's a more complex text. So some of these readings students might take home, they might provoke discussion, they might provoke critical thinking, and other points of information that we thought would be necessary for this course. So that's why we like to propose this, is adding this to the course. We did consider some other texts. Most of the other texts were more specialized. So this text gives a broader. Sorry, I'm trying to click on. I have the Kindle version, so I'm trying to click on table of contents. This text, talks about the idea of truth, who journalists work for, how to verify sources, and the independence of journalism, the duty of journalists to be a voice for the people, and so forth and so on, and all those journalistic concepts that are necessary. Again, these readings offer a higher level of rigor for our students. Some of the other resources that we considered were more specialized, so we only focus on ethics, or would only focus on certain components. This one was more broad-based, would give our students a lot more